today because we were celebrating at the temple. Here we are, and we're going to discuss the Leelas of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Specifically, I was reading this morning his favorite verses. I thought that would be interesting. Amongst other things, we could hear some of his favorite verses and why they were favorite. It's quite interesting why they were favorite. It reveals a lot about his mission. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvise Sasandivari Paschatya Dasatarine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvise Sasandivari Paschatya Dasatarine. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami iti namane. Madhur Ujvala Premaja Sri Rupanuga Bhakti Rasi Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostate. Namaste Gauravani Sri Bhurtai Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine. This morning, I was reminded of something, two stories. It was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's mother, Bhagavati Devi, who made her last request to him that you spread Krishna consciousness outside of India. You spread Krishna consciousness around the world. That was her request to him. Interesting, isn't it? And as you know, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had sent some of his followers to the West, but they were not successful, at least not as successful as he would have liked or wanted. And so he had called them back, and he was in the assembly of devotees, and he was looking around, and then all of a sudden he was staring at someone. And that person he was staring at was Srila Prabhupada. And at that time, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati made a prediction. He said, sometime in the future, someone will go to the West and successfully spread Krishna consciousness. Of course, we know who that someone is, but interestingly, he knew Prabhupada would do it. There were other indications when members of the Gaudiya Math asked Srila Bhaktisiddhanta if Prabhupada could help them manage one of the temples. He said no. In due course, he will do everything. So he seemed to know, he seemed to understand that that was going to happen. Hare Krishna. So, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, in his eternal form, is a manjari. And he never expressed that to anyone. But as you may know the story, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he wanted help to spread Krishna consciousness. He needed someone to carry the mission after him. And he prayed for a ray of Vishnu, someone from the camp of Vishnu, the associates of Vishnu, to come down and help him. And his umbilical cord, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, when he was born, his umbilical cord was wrapped around him like a Brahman thread. And then when the Rath Yatra cart stopped in front of his house and his mother brought him in front of the cart, the garland fell off Jagannath onto the body or for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And at that point, Bhaktivinoda Thakur knew this is the person Krishna has sent. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta never revealed his position, but one of his disciples had a dream or a vision of who he was. It's kind of amazing to think that the disciple had that purity and insight. And he said, "Are you Nayana Manjari in your eternal form?" And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he didn't deny it. He said yes. So that's how we know his eternal position. And with any great personality who's descending for his Leela, his extraordinary. Nothing is ordinary about him. He had memorized the Bhagavad Gita when he was 7. Have any of you memorized the Bhagavad Gita, even if you're 77? No, it's not normal. It's not impossible, but it's not normal, especially not for a 7-year-old. So he exhibited the intelligence, a vast intelligence and scholarship, even at an early age. It was obvious he was not an ordinary person. And Srila Prabhupada said he was like a walking encyclopedia. That everything that he taught, he had verses to quote from. And he had this perfect memory where he remembered whatever he read. So he was a literal walking encyclopedia. But not only did he know, but in his pranam mantra, Apasiddhanta Dvanta Harine, he was one of his missions, or one of the things that he did that was, you could say, his mission, was Apasiddhanta Dvanta Harine, to root out any Apasiddhanta, any misunderstanding of Vaishnavism. And misunderstanding is normal in the material world. So there has been and will be, and somehow or in every religion, there's always some misunderstanding. So he was very, very concerned about representing the proper Siddhanta that has come from Rupa Goswami. So, Rupanuga Viruddhapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine. The Siddhanta of Rupanuga, if there was any deviation from Rupanuga, then he would catch it, he would establish it, he would defeat it. So that was an important mission for him, to establish Siddhanta. And he wrote extensively, not just books, but articles that he wanted all his disciples to read, to establish Siddhanta so that they could preserve the teachings of Mahaprabhu as they come through the Goswamis. So that's why he has that pranam mantra. And we have heard that he was lion-like in his preaching, and he was lion-like in the sense of removing this kind of deviation, this kind of ignorance. Wherever he would see it, he would deal with it. He wouldn't let it go. He wouldn't turn the other cheek. He wouldn't turn his back to it. He would call it out. Wherever there was anything less than pure bhakti, he didn't want anything to do with it. There are stories where he was offered positions before he started his mission. He was working. He was an astrologer. He was offered respectable positions, but unless he could elucidate pure bhakti, he didn't want anything to do with it. And he was once at the home of a king, and there wasn't sufficient opportunity to speak Hari Katha, to speak about Krishna. So he fasted, and obviously, if you have a guest that's fasting, especially if you're Indian, because guests are to be treated like God, if you have a guest that's fasting, you become very upset. What am I doing wrong? And Bhaktisiddhanta said, I am not having the opportunity to give you Hari Katha, so I don't want to take anything from you. It's not proper that I take anything from you, so I'm fasting. So he was very, very particular about everything being proper, and especially Siddhanta being proper. And Srila Prabhupada said his greatest concern for the Krishna consciousness movement is that we would misunderstand Siddhanta, or we would speculate, we would come up with the wrong conclusions. So this is a very important function of the acharyas, to establish proper understanding. We can see also in our movement how, if we're not careful, we can easily misunderstand something, and that misunderstanding can be ingrained as a Siddhanta of our philosophy when it's not. So we have to be careful. That happened early on in the movement. For some reason, devotees were speaking some Mayavadi tainted philosophy that Prabhupada is actually Krishna. Strange, although Prabhupada never said that. In fact, said he wasn't many times, that nobody can be God. Still, it entered. So these things happen. So I thought today we could take advantage of today, of his appearance day, and learn about some of the verses that were his favorite verses and why they were favorite. And I think by doing this, we'll get to see this Siddhanta Advaita Hari, and how many of these verses were appreciated by him because they were the essence of the Bhagavatam, were the essence of various scriptures. He, especially Srimad Bhagavatam, and especially Chaitanya Charitamrita, he said if the world flooded and you had to grab your possessions, grab Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and Chaitanya Charitamrita. I don't know what's going on with the connection. Every time it rains here, the connection goes crazy. Otherwise, I just have to go off and come back. It's nothing. There's no settings that are any different. It's the internet. So I don't have to go off. Robotic sound. It's the internet.